Blog Talk Radio.
It's Blog Talk Radio, and it's the Danny Tisdale Show, and guess who I am, Danny Tisdale. I am glad to be here, and more importantly, I'm glad that you're here with us. And as I always say, and as I always want you to do, if you have any questions or you'd like to recommend someone to the show, don't forget to hit us up at Harlem World Magazine on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much wherever that social media, your favorite social media platform is, we are there. And today, as we always do, we welcome leaders, legends, and trailblazers. And we've got a great trailblazer on the call today. You know that we love to celebrate Harlem, the greatest community in the world, and we're going to get right into it. But before I get into it, the conversation that we're about to have started based on an article that was posted on, I guess that was June 3rd, and titled was Harlem AARP members head to Albany to fight RX costs and help utility consumers. And this is a great article about, really Harlem at work and really affecting change. Harlem residents pay some of the highest utility bills in the nation, yet unlike most states, New York lacks an independent utility consumer advocate with the power to challenge unfair rate hikes. And we are extremely lucky to have Mr. Reggie Nance on the call. And Reggie, before we get started, I want to lay a little bit more road down on how we get here. Mr. Nance is AARP Associate State Director for Multicultural Outreach, and he's going to talk to us about the fact of what I just mentioned, that Harlem residents pay some of the highest utility bills in the nation. Yet, unlike most states, again, as I said, there is not that independent entity, the utility consumer advocate, with the power to challenge unfair rate hikes in the courts. And Mr. Nance, thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Danny. Thank you for having me on the show today.
And thank you for being here. Are you a dad?
I am not.
Oh, you are not. I was going to wish you Happy Father's Day, but we'll give you some wishes after the show and going forward because, I do want to wish you the best of luck on this campaign. But first of all, with my intro, how do we get here that Harlem residents pay some of the highest utility bills in the nation? How is that possible?
Well, Danny, Con Edison has always had high rates because the cost of living and doing everything in New York City is well above the national average. But that's the point. A 10% increase on an already high bill is even higher than a 10% increase on a lower bill in other parts of the country. And that's why our AARP members, many of whom are on fixed or limited income, can afford a 10% increase, even less than folks elsewhere. And, Danny, I made up that 10% number just by way of an example. But I may be even lowballing it because Con Edison is actually proposing a rate increase of about 9% for electric delivery and about 15% for gas delivery for next year. And they want the increases to extend out over a 3-year period. And I should note that we're talking delivery charges, not the actual other part of your bill, which is the actual energy charge itself, and there's no way to predict the cost of that. But you get the point. We need to do something, and that's for drug prices. The United States doesn't regulate drug prices the way other countries do, and we know that drug companies need to invest in research and development, but it's like utility rates. The price is already high, and every time it goes up, there's more of a gap between what we pay and what folks in other countries like Canada pay. There may be an update at some point, Danny, on these two things, because right now as we speak, on the Senate floor up in Albany, the utility bill is scheduled on the docket to be discussed, and we hope that happens today, if not over the next 2 days, because we only have a few more days of session left. And then there's an RX bill a prescription drug bill for formularies where people can change the price of what you pay. Pharmaceutical companies can change the price of what you pay in the middle of the year. So there's a bill currently in the Assembly that's on the docket, and we're hoping that will go up for debate too as well.
I'm just, flabbergasted over here because, I didn't know about this. And even when we posted, almost you could call it an invite because we were letting our readers know that they could jump on the bus and head to Albany with you guys, that, we just couldn't believe it. Of course, we checked and did our fact checking and found out that it is true. But before I get overly excited here, and not do what I would do as if I'm meeting someone for the first time. Reggie, let's backtrack a little bit, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this is important to you, even though you are the Associate State Director, but why is this important to you? And and again, start with, a little bit about you.
Well, just by way of background, I've been at AARP for 4 years now. August will make 4 years, and I'm specifically charged with a couple of things. My primary role is to do outreach to to African Americans, Blacks, and Caribbeans across the state. That's my primary role. And then from a New York City specific assignment, I'm responsible for all things in the borough of Brooklyn and for all things in Harlem. So if it happens in Harlem and if it happens in Brooklyn, it's my responsibility. I absolutely love what I do.
Well, go ahead.
No, and I was about to say that before that, I spent 10 years working for the American Diabetes Association, doing similar work. And then before coming to AARP, I actually worked in the radio business. I was the director of our social impact marketing division that I started for Emmons Communications, which is a company that at the time owned Hot 97, 98.7 Kiss FM, and CD 101.9. So I was responsible for creating a brand new division, generating revenue through social impact marketing, through cause marketing, working for a variety of clients on a variety of issues. And it just so happened that over those 7 years in the radio business, AARP was my client, and one day they said, we want you to come work for us and do what you do for us. We want you to do it 365 days a year for us. So here I am at AARP, and that's how I got to be where I am.
Well, and that's great, and you've been there for 4 years, so you know what you're doing and the work that you've done beforehand through the networks and corporations. But it just astonishes me that New Yorkers, and drilling down even locally, that Harlemites are in the situation that they're in, and then specifically, like you said before, I asked you to talk about your experience, your background of that it seems to have been kind of the norm, and but there is some change afoot. I hear you saying that with the RX bill, there's a couple of days, from what I hear you saying, before there's a vote on this bill.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually have 3 different bills when it comes to RX that I want to talk about. And I'll talk about the one that's actually getting the traction that I mentioned that's up for discussion on the floor. But there are 3 things that we want to do through 3 different bills. The first is, I mentioned Canada. When you look at what Canadians pay for prescription drugs, we pay in the United States twice as much for brand name prescription drugs and about 20% as much for generic drugs. And then when it comes to certain drugs, we pay as much as 10 times as much than they do in Canada. And if we look down to Florida, the state of Florida just a few weeks ago passed a bill, and the governor has signed it into law with bipartisan support, to import drugs from Canada in an effort to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Floridians. We have a similar bill that we've put on the docket here in New York State too as well. So that's one thing that we're looking at from a prescription drug standpoint: the safe and legal importations of drugs. And I understand that there are actually 2 counties in New York State that already do that. So there's precedence for that. in the state. Didn't know that until we started this process.
Interesting.
Then I want to talk about this other thing.
Well, let me ask you real quickly. Because I'm not big on pointing fingers and who's at fault, and we don't have enough time for that. But you know what? Go through your points, and then we can circle back. Because I know there were two more issues you want to talk about.
Yeah. Now this other thing is really going to get you. So when
brother, this got me already. So I don't know if I can take any more. Go ahead.
I hope you can, because we got to get it out there, Danny.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead, man.
When you get a patent for a drug, you get that patent for a certain amount of years. It could be up to 20 years, let's say. Once that patent expires, the drug can now go generic. Generic manufacturers can now produce that drug at a much lower cost.
Right.
Well, there's this thing, Danny, called pay to delay, where the big brand pharmaceutical companies pay the generic drug manufacturers money to delay bringing the generic form of that drug to market for as much as 9 months. Unconscionable, unimaginable. But they can legally do that right now. So and that's something that would have to be changed at a federal level, and that's something that that we're working on a federal level. But from a state standpoint, with the whole pay to delay, what can we do? We believe in transparency. That if these deals are happening, that the public should be aware of them, and that the drug manufacturers should file information with our Attorney General to let the Attorney General know that they're paying to delay these drugs from coming to market. But in an ideal world on a federal level, we would make that practice illegal altogether. But from a state point, at this point, let's make it transparent so that people know about it. So that's the second bill that we have around prescription drugs. Then the third is this whole notion of price gouging. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I was talking to one of our Harlem volunteers, one of the people who went up to Albany with me the other day on the bus that you talked about. And she was telling me the story. She has an eye transplant, and there are eye drops that she needs to take to keep for moisture. She was paying for years $25 for the eye drops. And she went to the pharmacy, and they said, okay, that'll be $6.30. And she thought, oh, goodness, I'm lucky. Now it's gone down to $6.30. No, it had gone up to $630. She went from paying $25 a month for this medication that she needed to $630. She said, I couldn't afford that. I couldn't afford to pay that every month and buy groceries. Her doctor got on the phone. He called the pharmaceutical. They wrote letters. They tried to do all this stuff. It didn't work. So she had to change to a different medication. And instead of taking the medication one time a day, like she used to with the medication she was using for years, she now has to take it 4 drops a day, and it's not quite as effective. And she and her doctor are still, fighting the pharmaceutical company to try to get to come to some relief so she can get back on the original eye drop that she needs. But that's an example of price gouging. We've introduced a bill on the state level that would give the Attorney General the power to prosecute drug makers for price gouging by whatever determination, criteria that the Attorney General would use, so that there's some kind of regulation for when companies raise drug prices. And then the final bill I mentioned was the bill that's getting the traction now is the formulary bill. And what that means is at the beginning of the year, when you sign up for your insurance plan, there are a list of drugs that are approved by your insurance plan that you can take. If your drug is on the list, you can take it. If it's not, you can't. You have to find a similar drug. Right now, what happens is that insurance companies can change that formulary as many times a year as they want. They can take a drug off. They can there's what they call tiers. Tier 1, 2, 3. Drugs have different tiers. They can raise the tier, and when they raise the tier, that means the price goes up. We think just like people can, you have once a year you select your plan, for prescription drugs, that the insurance companies should be required only once a year to be able to change a formulary. That they can't change it, 3-4 times a year at will, and
when they want
the cost of prescription drugs for the senior. So that is the bill that's actually out of the 4 that I mentioned. That's the one that's getting the most traction.
Interesting. And let's see. There's so much. It's not hard, but where do we start in solving the problem? And I do want to ask a little bit, or let me say it this way: did we get here, Reggie, by the corporate drug companies having a relationship with those who make decisions that others didn't have, and that relationship just created the scenario that we're in now?
Well, a couple of things.
Lobbyists or?
So this is nothing new. It's been going on for a long time, and we did see it happening. And AARP has actually been working for over 60 years now on issues like utility costs and drug prices. But there's always more to do, and we engage our members and volunteers to help us fight the fight. But let's be real. The pharmaceutical industry is a big, huge industry. I mean, they spend $24 billion alone in marketing to healthcare professionals and another $5.5 million marketing to consumers. So
a lot of money.
They have a lot of clout and a lot of power. And they fund politicians. They fund community-based efforts. So that they have that kind of clout and presence and power. But at the end of the day, Danny, this is something that we think we can win on, and we are winning. And here's why we think we can win: because it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. And when you look at the lawmakers, the people who are making the decisions, guess what? They have people they care about. They have their own caregiving stories, and they've experienced firsthand through the people that they love the impact of the high cost of prescription drugs. Even the president has said that this is an issue that we've got to take on.
Right.
So it's not Democrat or Republican. There's a lot of bipartisan support to take on lowering the cost of prescription drugs, because from my standpoint, it's a moral issue. People should not have to choose between eating and taking their medicine. People should not have to skip taking their medicine because they can't afford it. People should not have to choose between paying their rent and taking their medicine. It's a moral issue, and it resonates with people. And I think the time is now to get something done.
Well, very quickly, just letting our listeners know they're listening to the Danny Tisdale Show on Harlem World Radio, and we're talking to Reggie Nance. He's Associate State Director for Multicultural Outreach with AARP. And Reggie, what made AARP want to get in this fight when they could have stayed on the sidelines looking at what is going on, and especially with Harlem?
Well, a couple of things. We have 38 million AARP members nationwide, and there are 2.6 million of them in New York State. And quite frankly, Danny, we go where our members tell us to go. We take on the issues that our members tell us they care about. The things like Social Security and Medicare and prescription drugs. We can't be an organization that advocates for the best policies for people who are 50 plus and not take on issues like prescription drugs that impact the pocketbooks of our members. We go there because of who we represent in the 50 plus population in Harlem and also across the state and across the country.
Well, Reggie, that makes sense. Somebody might be thinking, and they say to themselves, well, their demo are folks that are over 50, and maybe they're not that interested, even though we know that people over 50 are typically very interested. They do vote more than others. What has been the response to what you're saying? Do Harlemites already understand that, or is it new for some of them? What are the responses you're getting?
We deal with a lot of issues, Danny, and we get people to sign petitions, that we send to legislators. And, some issues are heavier lift than others. But I have to tell you, the moment I say the cost of prescription drugs and we're out and about in the community, people people are like, stop. We pay too much for drugs.
You don't need to show me anything. Where do I sign?
They're ready to sign. They're ready to do what you want them to do. This is an easy lift for us because it impacts so many people. And I also want to share another story with you. Because
ridiculous.
we focus on the 50-plus population, but prescription drug prices affect people of all ages.
Everybody.
I was
right.
just on Facebook, Danny, the other day. I'm looking. A young woman who used to work for me at the American Diabetes Association. She's now turned 40 years old this year, and she's a New York City public school teacher, and she has a daughter who's 13. And she was on, and both her and her daughter have type 1 diabetes. She was on Facebook saying that the cost of a vial of insulin had gone up so much, and then with insulin, the thing about it, you get a prescription, but some months you're going to need more, some you might need less, depending upon what your blood sugar levels are. So she was saying, asking people, she was saying she couldn't take generic insulin because she had been on a different kind for so long, but asking people if anybody out there had generic insulin that maybe her 13-year-old daughter could take it and that would be helpful for her. She had to resort to social media, and insulin is something that's been around for years. Many types, many kinds. We know how to manufacture insulin, readily and easily. But here she was, 40 years old, on social media, asking people if they had generic insulin that perhaps her 13-year-old daughter could use, because the cost every month for the two of them with type 1 diabetes has become so astronomical. So I say that to say it affects people of all ages, the cost of prescription drugs, and particularly people with any kind of chronic illness.
Well, and something that I don't want to go into because of time, but this also relates to the opioid effect that's affecting our country today, where people have just been sharing the drugs that they have without a prescription and just completely getting out of control. Talk to us a little bit also about, I'm just trying to find the independent. You suggest the independent utility consumer advocate, and we're switching back to utilities now. It almost seems like we need the same kind of advocate for drugs, but what would the independent utility consumer advocate do, Reggie, to help this situation?
Yeah, so here's the thing, what happens in Albany is that utilities companies typically every 3 years, they go before the Public Service Commission to ask for a rate increase. In a state where we already pay some of the highest energy costs. Never do they go to ask for a decrease.
God forbid.
But they're going to ask for an increase. And if big commercial interests, they have enough money to have people at the table advocating, for the big commercial interests. But the consumers like you and me, Danny, there's nobody at the table, independent of government, independent of the governor, of the legislature, who's there to roll back the books and have them justify it. The consumer's voice is missing from the table. And here's the thing about it. New York, we pride ourselves on leading the way in many things. Most states already have an independent utilities consumer advocate. We're in the minority of states who don't, for various reasons, which we won't get into on the call. And in those states where there are consumer advocates, independent consumer advocates in place, they've been able to demonstrate and show how they've saved millions and sometimes billions of dollars for consumers over the years through fighting unnecessary or unjustifiable rate increases. We need somebody at the table who can roll back the books, look at the numbers, say, we gave you an increase 3 years ago. What did you do with that? How do you justify this increase? And right now, there's nobody. But there are a whole lot of lawyers, for the utilities, and we pay for those lawyers, millions of dollars to be able to, we pay for them. They're fighting to get the increase, but there's nobody fighting to say why, how, and justify this. That's what an independent utilities consumer advocate will do.
Reggie, wait a minute. Well, some listeners out there would say that that's why we have elected officials. They're supposed to be at the table to have that conversation. And I'm not pointing out anyone. I'm not saying anyone specific. I'm not talking about any party. I'm just saying what a listener might be thinking. What do you say to that?
Well, yeah, let me just say this. Certainly, we want to hold our elected officials accountable. And their role is to pass legislation. That's what they do. We're talking about somebody who's even independent of elected officials. They're not taking campaign funds. They're not reporting to the governor. They're independent, and which is very different from an elected official. But we do need the elected officials to pass this bill so that we can have an independent utilities consumer advocate.
That's even a better point. Well, oh, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, like I said, the consumer utilities advocate, the bill is on the docket to be discussed in the Senate. So there is traction there, but we only got 3 more days left. So we're hoping we'll get it done this year. If not, we'll have to wait till next year.
That's why I want to, we're going to post this today. And what I wanted to ask you is to speak to our readers. I'm going to post this on the site, so it'll be our listeners also, obviously, audio piece. What can they do with the time that we have, that they have, as the clock ticks? What can be done? What should they do right after they hear this?
Here's what everybody should do right after they hear this. They should get on the phone and call their state legislators to urge them to take action on both issues. And here are phone numbers that you can call. For the Independent Utility Consumer Advocate, call 1-844-586-9562. 844-586-9562 for the Independent Utility Consumer Advocate. And then for the prescription drug bill, particularly the formulary one, the number to call for that is 844-254-6882. That's 844-254-6882 for the formulary bill with the prescription drugs. And there's also a website that people can go to. A website that people can go to to find out more about the things that we're doing for prescription drugs, and that's AARP.org/StopRxGreedNY. Action.AARP.org/StopRxGreedNY. Let me say that again. Action.AARP.org/StopRxGreedNY for more information online.
Fantastic. Reggie Nance, thank you so much for being on the show. The time has flown by, as I suspected, and we suspected it would. And Reggie Nance is the AARP Associate State Director for Multicultural Outreach. And folks, do exactly as he said and call those numbers. Call them ASAP. Thank you, Reggie Nance, for being on the show, and really, really appreciate the work that you're doing for Harlem, for the New York City and the state of New York, and quite frankly, it looks like a coming battle across the nation. Thank you, Reggie Nance.
Thank you, Danny, for having me, and I hope you'll have me back again.
I will. Thanks, man. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Well, folks, people doing great work in a great community like Harlem is the stuff that we love. And Reggie Nance and those folks at AARP are doing some trailblazing work. And it's work that is needed, that we all need and desire. Get those phone numbers, make those phone calls, and let your elected official know what's going on or what's not going on that you don't like. Thank you for listening in, and shout back if you want to let us know how things are going as you reach out to your electeds or you're having any trouble or whatever it may be. Thank you again. Talk to you soon. Bye.